Brother's wedding cost $43,000. I know the exact number because I paid every single invoice myself. The florist. The catering deposit. The venue down payment when my mother called me crying in February saying they'd lose the date if someone didn't wire the money by Friday. The photographer my sister-in-law wanted because she'd seen her work on Instagram and absolutely had to have her. The rehearsal dinner at that Italian place downtown where my aunt ordered the branzino and 3 bottles of wine without looking at the menu prices once. $43,000. I wrote it in the spreadsheet and looked at it sometimes at night. Not out of resentment, at least not at first. More like I needed it to feel real. My name is Vera. I'm 31. I work in pharmaceutical data analytics, which sounds impressive and is mostly just staring at spreadsheets and a home office in a city where I moved specifically because the job paid well and I needed distance. I don't say that bitterly. I say it the way you say a fact you've accepted. The distance was necessary. The job was the reason I could. My brother Owen is 3 years older than me. We were close when we were kids. He used to let me sit with him while he watched movies I was technically too young for, and he never made me feel stupid for not understanding the jokes. Somewhere in our 20s, that version of him got harder to find. He started dating Serena, who I liked at first, and then they moved in together and the calls got shorter and the family holidays got more complicated, and I told myself it was just what happened when people built their own lives. I believed that for a long time. The engagement was announced at Christmas 2 years ago. My mother cried at the table in a way that seemed rehearsed, dabbing her eyes with a cloth napkin, and my grandmother clapped. I hugged Owen, and I hugged Serena, and I meant it. I genuinely did. I was happy for them. The first ask came 3 days later. My mother called while I was at the grocery store. "We're looking at venues," she said. "The one they really love requires a deposit. It's time sensitive." She didn't ask. She explained, "There's a difference." And I registered it even then. But I let it pass because it was my brother's wedding and I had the money. And what kind of person says no to that? The kind of person who sees where it's going, I suppose. But I wasn't that person yet. Over the next 14 months, the asks came in a rhythm I eventually learned to predict. Always urgent. Always framed as a crisis that would ruin everything if not solved immediately. The florist needed a deposit this week, or they'd book another couple. The photographer had 1 date left. The venue added a service charge my mother hadn't budgeted for, and could I help cover the gap, just this once? I said yes every time. I told myself it was a gift, that I was choosing to do this, that nobody was forcing me. What I didn't fully let myself see was the other side of those phone calls, the way my mother never said thank you before moving to the next item on the list. The way Owen, when I mentioned the costs once, very carefully said, "Mom's handling all that," as if I hadn't just told him I was the one who wired the money. The way Serena, at the engagement party I also helped fund, introduced me to her friends as Owen's sister. She works in tech or something. I smiled. I always smiled. I was good at that. 2 weeks before the wedding, my mother asked me to write something. Not a toast. She'd already assigned that to my aunt, who was apparently a natural public speaker, a fact I'd never previously been informed of. She wanted me to write a few words for the program, a paragraph, a tribute to Owen from his little sister. I spent an evening on it. I wrote something honest and warm about the movies when we were kids, about the particular kind of safety of having someone older who never made you feel small. I sent it to my mother. She replied the next morning. So sweet. We might adjust slightly for length. I found out at the wedding what adjust slightly meant. They cut my paragraph entirely and replaced it with a line that read, "Owen's sister Vera sends her love." I found out by opening the program at my seat. I sat with that for a moment. I turned the paper over. I looked at the font, the little floral design in the corner, the careful curation of every other detail. I looked at my own name reduced to 4 words that could have been written by anyone. I put the program in my purse and watched my brother walk down the aisle, and I smiled the whole time. The reception was at a vineyard 40 minutes outside the city. Exposed beams, string lights, the whole thing. I'd seen the invoice for the venue. I knew what the per-plate cost was. I watched my family move through it like they'd built it themselves. Dinner was served at round tables with little cards spelling out each guest's name in calligraphy. My card had a smudge on the V minor thing. I noticed it. My uncle, my mother's brother, a man who had called me too serious at every family gathering since I was approximately 14 years old, sat down next to me and said, within the first 5 minutes, that I should think about freezing my eggs if I was going to keep prioritizing my career. Just practical advice, he said, reaching for the bread basket. I said, thank you for thinking about my reproductive timeline. He didn't catch the tone. He never does. The toast started after dinner. My aunt went first, the natural public speaker. She told a story about Owen at age 7 that was genuinely funny. Then came Owen's best man, his college roommate, who went 3 minutes over and showed a slideshow. Then my mother stood up. She was glowing. That's the word. She held her glass and the room quieted, and she looked at Owen and Serena with this expression that I think was the most purely happy I'd seen her look in years, and part of me, a real part, not a complicated one, was glad to see it. She talked about what Owen meant to her, about watching him grow into a man she was proud of, about Serena, who she called the daughter she'd always hoped for. She talked about the village it takes to build something, about family showing up. She said, there are people here tonight who gave so much to make this day possible. You know who you are. This family runs on love and on people who show up. She looked around the room. She looked at my aunt. She looked at my grandmother. She looked at Owen's friends. She did not look at me. I counted the seconds. I'm not sure why. I counted to 11 before she raised her glass and the room went with her, and I raised mine, too. And I drank. She sat down to applause. My brother leaned over and kissed her cheek. I set my glass down very carefully. Next to me, my uncle poured himself more wine. I thought about the spreadsheet. I thought about the Friday wire transfer in February, the one she called crying about. I thought about the florist deposit and the photographer invoice and the rehearsal dinner check. I thought about the paragraph I'd written sitting at my kitchen table, the one that now existed nowhere except my own sent folder. I thought about $43,000 in 4 words, and sends her love. And something settled in me. Not rage. I want to be careful about that, because rage would have made me do something I'd regret in a room full of people holding champagne. It was quieter than rage. It was the particular stillness that arrives when you finally let yourself see something clearly. I had the emails. I'd kept every single one. Here's something I want to explain, because people ask why I didn't just get up and leave. My friend Jonah asked me that afterward, and he said it the way people say it, like it would have been simple, like dignity requires a dramatic exit. I didn't leave because I wanted to watch. I wanted to sit in that room that my money helped build and watch my brother dance with his wife under lights I'd paid for, and see my family be happy in the way families are supposed to be happy at weddings. And I wanted to know that I'd done that I'd contributed something real to it. Even if no one would ever say so out loud, I would know. And I wanted to feel what it felt like to know that, to sit with it, to let it be enough. It wasn't enough, but I wanted to give it the chance to be. So I stayed. I danced at the appropriate moments. I got photographed with Owen and Serena. And I smiled the way you smile when you genuinely wish someone well, even when you're also quietly deciding something. The quietly deciding part. That's what I want to talk about. I'm a data analyst. This is relevant. I do not react to things I feel in real time. I collect. I look at patterns. I let information accumulate until I understand what it's actually showing me, not what I want it to show me. It's a professional habit that is filtered all the way down into my personal life in ways that are sometimes useful and sometimes deeply lonely. What I had, by the time the dancing started at that reception, was 14 months of documented communication. Every email, every text, every invoice, my mother requesting funds and me confirming transfers. Her responses, which usually moved immediately to the next item. The timeline was airtight, and it was all sitting in a folder on my laptop labeled, with the kind of practicality that I find genuinely funny in retrospect, family admin. I hadn't saved it as evidence. I'd saved it because I'm organized. But sitting at that table watching the first dance, I thought about the folder, and I understood that it had always been both things. My mother had said, you know who you are. Yes, I do. 3 days after the wedding, I drafted an email. I didn't send it immediately. I drafted it, and I read it the next morning, and I made edits, and I read it again the following evening, and then I slept on it one more night. I am not an impulsive person. The email was addressed to my mother. It was also CC'd to Owen. It was calm. It was specific. It said, I want to be transparent about something before too much time passes. I've included below a summary of the contributions I made toward the wedding, along with the relevant documentation. I'm not asking to be repaid. I am asking to be acknowledged specifically by you in a direct conversation. The night of the wedding was the first time I understood that you may not have intended to offer that acknowledgement. I'd like to know whether that's true. Below the email, I attached a PDF. In the PDF was a clean, formatted table. Date description. Amount. Running total at the bottom in bold. $43,218. I added the $18 because it was the exact number and I believe in precision. I sent it on a Tuesday morning and then I went to make coffee and I stood in my kitchen and I noticed my hands were not shaking, which surprised me. I'd expected them to shake. My mother called 40 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 4 minutes long. I listened to it twice. The first time I listened for content, the second time I listened for tone. Content, she was hurt. She hadn't realized I was keeping track. She thought I was doing it from love. She felt ambushed. She said the wedding had been an emotional time and she couldn't be expected to remember every detail in a toast. She said she'd always known she could count on me, that she'd said that to people, that she'd always been proud of me, and that this felt like an attack. Tone. Not guilty. Defensive with an undercurrent of something that sounded, if I'm honest, more like fear than hurt. I didn't call back that day. Owen texted me that evening. Can you call Mom? She's really upset. I texted back. I'll reach out when I'm ready. He didn't respond. The conversation with my mother happened 5 days later. I called her. I kept notes, which I know sounds clinical, but it's how I process things I need to remember accurately. She started with hurt. That was the first 10 minutes. How unexpected this felt, how I'd never said anything, how she'd thought we were on the same page. I said, what page did you think we were on? She said we were family. Family helps each other. I said, yes, that's true. I'm asking you to name what I contributed. She named some things. She was vague about the amounts. She said she knew I'd helped a lot. She said she was grateful. I asked her why she hadn't said any of that in her toast. Silence. A longer one than I expected. She said she hadn't wanted to make the toast about money. I said, you talked about the village it takes to build something. You said family shows up. You looked at everyone in the room except me. More silence. She said, I didn't realize you were counting. I said, Mom, I was the one who paid for the room you were standing in. What happened after that is not dramatic. I want to be honest about that. There was no scene. No one cried. At least not while we were on the phone. My mother said she was sorry, and I believe she was, in the particular way people are sorry when they've been caught seeing you as infrastructure instead of a person. But here's the part that I keep thinking about. About a week after that call, I mentioned to Owen that I wouldn't be available for Thanksgiving at my parents' house that year. Just a note, delivered the way you'd note a schedule conflict. He asked why. I said I was making some adjustments to how I spent my time and energy and that I'd let everyone know if something changed. He pushed back. He said I was being dramatic. He said Mom had apologized and I needed to let it go. I thought about sends her love. I thought about 4 words. I said, I'm not being dramatic, Owen. I'm just being honest about my capacity. He said, you've always been the sensitive one. I've been called the sensitive one my entire life. The one who takes things too hard. The one who makes things complicated. The one who should know by now that this is just how the family is, and if you love them, you accept it. I thought about $43,000. I said, I love you. I'll talk to you soon. And then I hung up, and I sat in the quiet of my apartment for a long time, and I noticed that my hands were still not shaking. Thanksgiving passed. My mother sent a text the morning of that, said we miss you, and I replied with a heart emoji because I am not cruel and I did miss them, in the way you miss a version of people that you've realized might not exist. Christmas. I offered to do a video call. They did it. It was 50 minutes of normal family conversation. Nobody said anything about the email or the call or the summer, and my grandmother told me my hair looked nice. It was fine. It was genuinely fine. What changed wasn't dramatic. Nothing blew up. There was no final confrontation, no ultimatum, no moment where I stood in a doorway and delivered a speech. What changed was the spreadsheet. I deleted it. Not because the numbers stopped being real, but because I'd stopped needing to look at them to feel grounded. I'd said what I needed to say. I'd sent what I needed to send. The documentation had done its job, not as a weapon, not even really as a confrontation, but as a mirror. I'd held it up and said, "Look at this," and the people I held it up to had seen themselves in it, even if they couldn't say so directly. That was enough. Not everything, but enough. I want to say something to you. If you've been the one in your family who shows up and keeps track and tells yourself it's fine because you do it from love, if you've sat at a table that you helped build and watched people celebrate things you made possible and listened to the word family used as both reason and reward, it is okay to count. You are not small for counting. You are not selfish for wanting to be seen. Knowing your own value is not the same as asking to be repaid. It's not the same as threatening. It's not the same as making it about money when you're actually talking about something much older and quieter. The way some families learn to treat the most dependable person in the room as a given, a constant, a resource that renews itself. You are not a resource. You are a person who deserves to be standing in the room they helped build and have someone look at you. I looked at myself. Finally, after a long time of not quite doing that. My hands weren't shaking. That still surprises me. What would you say to the version of yourself that kept writing checks and calling it love? I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that wedding. Not in a mystical way. I don't believe the universe keeps score. I believe people do. I believe that every choice compounds quietly over time, and eventually the math becomes undeniable. My mother didn't set out to erase me from that evening. I genuinely believe that. She's not a villain. She's a person who learned, somewhere along the way, that the most reliable people in a family don't need to be thanked. They'll show up anyway, and she was right for a long time. I did show up, again and again, without being asked twice, without making it complicated. I was easy to take for granted because I made myself easy to take for granted. That's the part I had to sit with. Not with bitterness, but with honesty. The receipt I sent wasn't about the money. I want to be clear about that because Owen still thinks it was, and I've stopped trying to convince him otherwise. The receipt was about making something visible that had been deliberately kept invisible. It was about saying, I was here, I contributed something real, and you looked around that room and chose not to see me. That's not a financial complaint. That's a moral one. What I've learned, and this took longer than I'd like to admit, is that intelligence without integrity is just strategy. My mother is a smart woman. She managed a wedding beautifully. She coordinated people and timelines and emotions with real skill. But she used that intelligence to take the path of least resistance, which meant leaning on the person least likely to push back. That works until it doesn't, until the quiet person decides that being easy isn't the same as being okay with everything. Vera, the version of me that existed before I sent that email, had a lot of endurance. I'll give her that. She could carry weight without complaining, work through discomfort without making it anyone else's problem, write a check and call it love. There's something genuinely strong in that, but endurance without self-respect is just a slow erosion. You don't notice it happening until you're sitting at a table you paid for, reading your own name reduced to 4 words, and something in you goes very, very still. That stillness was the turning point. Not anger. Stillness. I think real resilience isn't about how much you can absorb. It's about knowing, clearly and without self-deception, what you're absorbing and why. If the answer is because I love them and I'm choosing this freely, that's one thing. If the answer is because I don't know how to ask for what I actually need, that's something else entirely, and it's worth looking at directly. I deleted the spreadsheet because I didn't need it anymore. I'd said what it needed to say. But I kept the lesson, which is this. You are allowed to count. Counting is not greed. Counting is just paying attention. And the people who tell you not to count are usually the ones who benefit from your not knowing the total. What would you say to the version of yourself that kept showing up and calling it love?